The desert sun was cruel, sharp, and unfiltered, just like the people who ran Fort Radford. When the transport bus hissed to a stop, the first figure to step off wasn't what the others expected. She wasn't young. She wasn't eager. She wasn't wide-eyed. She was quiet. Evelyn Shaw wore a plain grey tee and regulation boots, but what stood out, what made everyone whisper, was the grey streaks in her tied-back hair, and the soft lines that framed her eyes like rivers carved by years. One of the recruits muttered under his breath, "We get retirees now?" Another laughed. Must be someone's clerical error, or maybe she's here to take notes, not to train. But Evelyn said nothing. She carried her bag with both hands. No wobble, no fuss, just an efficient stride across the concrete, as though she had done this before. Maybe not here, but somewhere harder. Inside the admin building, Sergeant Charles Thorny, a mountain of muscle, and Menace glanced at the clipboard, then up at her, his eyes narrowed with instant disapproval. "Specialist Evelyn Shaw," he read aloud, voice dripping with condescension. "Age? 42? He didn't hide his smirk. "You sure you're not here to lead a yoga class, ma'am?" The room chuckled. Evelyn stood at attention, calm, still. She didn't smile, didn't blink, didn't justify herself. That unsettled him more than any sharp comeback would have. Colonel Jasper Brandt, commanding officer of the intake program, stared at her file behind closed doors. One page, barely a career, no deployments, no commendations. Just basic training from 20 years ago, and a note, "Cleared for special assessment, Tier 3 authorization." To him, it looked like a political insertion, some senator pulling favors. When she walked into his office, Colonel Brandt didn't stand. "Specialist Shaw," he began, tapping the thin file, "this isn't a resume, it's a rumor." Her reply was quiet. "Yes, sir." He pressed, eyes testing. "This is not a retreat program, it's a crucible, 70% wash out, and that's among 25-year-olds in peak condition." "I understand, sir," she said. He paused. She didn't. And that was that. She was assigned to Delta Squad under Sergeant Thorne, who clearly saw her as an insult to his authority. From the moment she stepped onto the training grounds, he made her his personal mission. "Grandma," he bellowed on the obstacle course, "try not to snap a hip." Recruits snickered. Evelyn climbed the wall in silence. During weapons drills, he hovered behind her, barking in her ear. "You're breathing like a nursing home patient." But then on target reviewer grouping was almost a single hole. Even then, he sneered, "Beginner's luck." She never answered. A young private named Lucas Hayes began to notice. Evelyn didn't move like the others. She didn't explode into sprints. She flowed, steady, consistent. Mile after mile, others gasped and dropped back. She didn't. She didn't try to win. She just didn't fail. At the range, she cleaned her rifle longer than anyone else. Every spring and pin had the gleam of a watchmaker's touch. Hayes had grown up on a ranch. Evelyn reminded him of the lead mare Quiet, alert, unshakable, not the fastest, but always the last standing when storms came. But others didn't see that. They saw wrinkles. They saw silence. They mistook both for weakness. Lieutenant Cole Weston, fresh from the academy with a chin sharp enough to cut glass, took a particular joy in heckling her. In the mess hall, he'd nudge his buddies and shout across the room, "Hey, Shaw, want me to slice your meat for you? You good with the fork and knife?" Laughter followed like trained dogs. Evelyn? She kept eating, one bite at a time, not slower, not faster. That infuriated them. No flinch, no fight, no fear. They thought she was too old. They thought she didn't belong. So Sergeant Thorne decided to prove it. During the morning briefing, he cleared his throat and slapped a new sheet on the board. "We're accelerating Reaper drill to tomorrow," he announced. "Standards 3-on-1. He paused. His eyes gleamed. "But for sure, we'll be running 5-on-1. Real-world chaos. See if the old bones hold up." Even some recruits blinked at that. 5 was unheard of. Shaw just stood there. Didn't blink. Didn't protest. She nodded. And in that moment, something shifted. Not on the surface. Not yet. But deep beneath the tension and testosterone, a question began to hum like static in the air. Who is this woman really? The day of the Reaper drill arrived with a sharp wind and a heavy sense of anticipation. The gymnasium at Fort Radford wasn't just a training space, it was a proving ground, the kind of place where reputations were built or broken in seconds. And that morning, every recruit, every officer, every sergeant, even a few curious lieutenants crowded in, waiting for what many assumed would be a spectacle, maybe even a humiliation. Evelyn Shaw stood in the corner of the mat, stretching slowly, methodically. She looked unhurried, not lazy measured. Like someone whose muscles already knew what to do, and whose mind had moved past fear into something else entirely. Private Lucas Hayes leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her. He didn't laugh with the others. He hadn't been laughing for days. Not since the second time she'd lapped half the platoon on the endurance run, and didn't even break stride. Something about her didn't sit right, not in a bad way, in a bigger way. He couldn't put a name to it yet, but he knew this. Evelyn Shaw was not what she seemed. Sergeant Thorne, booming and red-faced, stomped into the gym like he owned it, and for years, he had. His voice had trained generations of soldiers through sweat, bruises, and fear. But today, it trembled just slightly when he pointed to the center of the floor. "All right, you maggots," he barked. "We're going live with the Reaper." He turned to Evelyn, his smile thin and sharp. 5 opponents, full contact, no breaks. Let's see if you've still got bones left by the end of it. Shaw didn't speak. She didn't nod. She just walked forward. Each step was deliberate, balanced, like the floor recognized her weight. The crowd shuffled, whispers passed like wind through leaves. From the observation deck above, Colonel Brandt stood with arms folded, watching her. He hadn't planned to come, but something about that one-page feelet nagged him. No soldier just appears after 20 years, gets cleared for special assignment, and quietly performs better than half the base. He'd come to see her fold. Thorne named her opponents. Lieutenant Westenoff, of course, along with 4 other brash, confident young officers, the best physical specimens in the group, all muscle, no doubts. They circled her on the mat, laughing and jostling. "Don't worry, Grandma," Weston grinned, cracking his knuckles. "We'll make this quick, like ripping off a Band-Aid." Still, Evelyn said nothing. She lowered into a stance so smooth, so calm, it looked unnatural among the tension around her. Not rigid, not showy, just rooted. The whistle blew. Weston charged first. All brute force, no finesse. A shoulder drop meant to bowl her over, make a point. But Evelyn moved, not back sideways. A pivot so clean, so minimal, he passed through the air where she'd been like a train rushing through a ghost. Her right hand tapped the nerve just beneath his ear. Her left foot brushed behind his knee. He dropped like a marionette with cut strings, face first, out cold. Silence spread like fog across the gym. The others froze, confused, unsure if they'd just seen what they thought they saw. Then 2 came at once, Cole and Bennett, one low, one high, a classic pincer strike. Shaw didn't panic. She turned with Cole's swing, guiding it past her head, grabbed his wrist, used his momentum to pivot and slammed him into Bennett mid-lunge. Bodies tangled. She pressed her foot into Cole's knee knot enough to break it, just enough to paralyze it with pain. 3 down, 10 seconds. The silence in the gym was now different, heavy, respectful. Brandt's brows lifted, just slightly. The last 2 approached more carefully. Chun and Davis. Their earlier swagger was gone. They circled like boxers now measured, afraid. Evelyn didn't attack. She stood still, watching, waiting. Not like a predator, like gravity itself. Davis moved first feint high, shoot low, wrestling, brutal physics. Evelyn's elbow dropped like a hammerite to the base of his neck, lights out. His body went limp. Chun froze, hands raised, white-knuckled. He looked at the others strewn across the mat. Looked at her. She hadn't even broken a sweat. His arms lowered in surrender. A silent nod. He wasn't fighting a woman. He was standing in front of something ancient, precise, unstoppable. And in that moment, Evelyn Shaw didn't look like a rookie. She looked like the thing they all trained to be. The gymnasium stayed frozen. No whistles, no orders, no cheers. Just 5 officers sprawled across the mat, and Evelyn Shaw standing alone calm, collected, untouched. Colonel Brandt hadn't moved from the observation deck. His knuckles were white around the railing, his mind racing. He'd seen a lot in his career: combat drills, bar fights, even live fire training mishaps. But this wasn't training. This was something else. Something deliberate, controlled, terrifying in its grace. His eyes drifted down again toward her wrist. Barely visible beneath her watch was a small, faded tattoo. A symbol. It looked almost like a ghost abstract, swirling lines. Hard to make out unless you knew. And he did. A cold shiver crept up his spine as the memory clawed its way from the classified corners of his mind. Years ago, in a remote outpost overseas, a retired CIA field officer had told him a drunken story over a dying campfire. A story about a unit so covert, so deep black, it didn't officially exist. Even their failures were scrubbed from history. Even their names were redacted before they were ever recorded. They were called the Spectres. Operatives pulled from the sharpest, deadliest corners of the world, trained in silence, deployed in shadows, and always deniable. They went where no satellite could see, where no flag could fly. The CIA spook had laughed bitterly and said, there was one they called the Ghost of the Ghosts. Spectre 1, a woman, the best they ever had, disappeared a decade ago. Some say she retired, others say she never left. Brant swallowed hard. He looked down again. Evelyn Shaw hadn't moved. She wasn't waiting for applause. She was just waiting. Sergeant Thorne stood off to the side, jaw slack, face pale, his fists clenched and unclenched by his side. The bravado had bled out of him. The shouting, the barking, the tough guy posturate, all looked like a costume now, fragile, useless. For weeks, he'd berated her, corrected her form, criticized her breath, her balance, her stance. But now, he realized what he'd been looking at. He hadn't been training a recruit. He'd been lecturing a master. Hayes stepped forward slowly, then clapped once, loud, sharp, a single echo in the quiet. The sound hung in the air. Then another soldier clapped, then another. And then the whole gym erupted. Not like fans at a game, not cheering for spectacle. It was something deeper, an apology, a recognition, a reverence. They had mocked her. They had dismissed her. Now they stewed very last one of them and applauded the woman they thought didn't belong. Evelyn didn't bow. She didn't smile. She simply gave a subtle Noda gesture of closure and walked off the mat, her steps as quiet as ever, past her opponents, past Thorne, past the stunned crowd. She picked up her towel and water bottle, wiped the dust from her hands, took a sip. And just as she turned to leave the gym, Colonel Brant came down the stairs 2 at a time, cutting her off at the door. "Specialist Shaw," he said. She paused. Brant struggled for the right words that didn't sound weak in comparison. He cleared his throat. "Your file, it doesn't do you justice." Evelyn looked at him, and for the first time, he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not pride, not anger. Just a deep, aching weariness. "It's just a file, sir," she said. "It did its job." Then she nodded, professional, clean, and pushed through the heavy steel doors. The sunlight caught her as she stepped outside, turning the dust around her into gold. And then she was gone. Behind her, the gym fell into a hush. No one moved. Not even the wounded officers still lying on the mat. The doors swung shut behind her, and with them, the world she had just dismantled slowly settled into stunned silence. Colonel Brant stood frozen, his gaze still locked on the doorway. The echo of her quiet footsteps lingered in his ears longer than any battlefield shout ever had. He hadn't just witnessed a drill. He hadn't even witnessed a fight. He had witnessed a reckoning. And now, standing on that empty gym floor, Sergeant Thorne felt something he hadn't felt since his very first deployment: shame. Real shame. Not embarrassment. Not a bruised ego. But the crushing realization that he'd spent weeks trying to teach a shark how to swim. He walked to the center of the mat where she had stood, the ghost-like impression of her calm still haunting the air. His eyes scanned the 5 officers, who were now slowly getting to their feet, each with the haunted look of men who had stared into something they couldn't comprehend. None of them spoke. None of them made excuses. Lieutenant Weston sat against the wall, rubbing his knee and avoiding everyone's gaze. The swagger was gone. So was the arrogance. In its place was something sobering. Respect. Hayes approached Thorne, hesitant. The younger private looked at his sergeant differently now, not as a leader, but as a man who had just been humbled. "Sir," he said quietly, "who was she?" Thorne didn't answer. Because he couldn't. He didn't have a name. He only had a feeling. One that gripped him tighter with every second. That whatever training he thought he knew, she had written the book before the ink in his own stripes was dry. Back in his office, Colonel Brandt sat alone at his desk, holding that thin, one-page file. It felt heavier now, like a secret too big for the folder that held it. On the back corner of the document was a tiny, almost unnoticeable black stamp, a symbol, the same ghost shape from her wrist. It wasn't a flourish. It was a signature. He leaned back in his chair, staring at it as if it might answer all his questions. But it didn't need to. She had said it best herself. It did its job. The file wasn't incomplete. It was a disguise. The most brilliant camouflage of all being ignored. Outside, Evelyn Shaw walked alone along the empty path between the gym and the barracks. The sun was hot on her face. The air smelled of dust and steel. She didn't think about the applause, or the gasps, or the realization that had swept through that room like wildfire. She had done what she came to do. She had met the standard. And in her world, that was enough. Years ago, she had been taught that real power doesn't need to declare itself, that true mastery wasn't loud or flashy, or dependent on recognition. It was quiet, precise, purposeful. She remembered an old instructor long gone know-who once told her, "The loudest warrior dies first. The quiet ones move like smoke." And that's what she had become. Smoke. Unseen. Unbothered. Unforgettable. That night, across the barracks, no one spoke her name. Not out of disrespect, but because it felt sacred, no too big for casual talk. Hayes sat on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, thinking not about what she had done but how she had done it. No grudge, no revenge, no anger. Just discipline. Grace. And silence. Maybe, he thought, real greatness didn't look like medals or speeches. Maybe it looked like a woman walking away with dust on her boots and peace in her eyes. Greatness does not dress to impress. It walks quietly and lets the truth speak. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. Next time you see someone quiet, someone older, someone overlooked, ask yourself, are they hiding something? Or are they just finished proving it?